Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Dell Networking OpenManage Tech Talk. Today's feature is going to be on the reporting framework, and then we will follow this up with a question and answer session. This is Bill Acevedo, and I have a panelist here, Brandon Norgard, to help me discuss the reporting framework and answer any questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and this session will be recorded and distributed later. So let's get started. So the reporting framework basically involves two areas: the reporting templates and then the reports themselves. And so all reports that we generate and use are based on templates. The first part we're going to start off in is talking about reports and report execution itself. And we'll just walk through that process and a little bit about the organization. And so what you see here is basically most of our pre-seeded reports that come with the product out of the box. And these are generally organized essentially by name of the item that's being reported on. And so for drivers, the drivers, for example, Brocade will seed, the driver itself when it's installed will seed these specific reports for Brocade, or if it's Cisco, you'll see specific reports for Cisco. And so basically you'd want to search for a driver if you're interested in a driver report, or in the case of some internal reports, they're just named by what they're doing, like CPU utilization. If you want an interface report, you search for interface. And so you can, there's about 90 or so reports, and you can browse those to see how those are named. And if you're creating your own report, you want to have some sort of a naming convention so you could easily locate those. But let's walk through some of the options that are available on a report. You can create new reports, and as I mentioned, those are based on templates. We'll get back to this in a minute. I'll click on new for just a quick example here. And so you essentially would create a new name here for your report. And then you would pick a template that you want to assign to that particular report. And so you can create as many reports based on one template as you would like. And then the second part of this is the filtering criteria. We'll show that in a minute, but it allows you to constrain the report. Like, for example, you may have an inventory report, and it will get everything in inventory unless you put some sort of a filter on it and say, I only want Cisco devices or only Dell Force 10 devices. And so that filter option is what you would use there. The other options here is you can edit reports, and so it gives you the opportunity to edit the name or the subtitles, the filter conditions, if you like. You can copy reports. This is also a way to create mini reports based on one template. You can copy an existing report that you like any number of times and rename it and reset the filter conditions however you see fit. The details, if you go to the details panel on any report, what you'll see is an execution history, and it'll show you how many times that's been executed. Over on the right here, there's other options in terms of a reference tree, and you can right-click and do other options there as well. For example, creating new reports, editing, or copying as well. Down on our list here, we have the basic execution of a report. If you click this, it's just going to go execute the report, and it'll show up in my alerts as a, like you see a little number 1 here, and let me just refresh this by date here. We'll see here some reports that were created. Here's one here, and it'll just basically show you immediately in a PDF format your report. Now there's also an option to do advanced reporting. Click on that, and you're provided here with some options that are a little more granular, give you some more options here. You can export or print a CSV, an HTML, or PDF. And you have the option here to override existing. This is somewhat of a obsolete option in that now we generate all reports with all are tagged with a date and timestamp, so it will not there was no need to overwrite. So this is a little bit obsolete. You can save the report. Generally, when you run a report, if you don't have this checked, it's not going to save it into the database, and so it will be gone after it drops off of the execution list. And so if you want to save it, by default this is checked and you save it in the database. The notify option will actually create an event in the alarm window every time your report is generated if you choose to do that. And then you can also have the option of emailing here. And so, for example, you would just type in the email and click plus for any number of emails you want to send. One caveat here is that you do need to go to the home page into that setting and set email. I believe it's the home page or admin page. That allows you to configure email. You need an SMTP server so it knows where to send these emails. But once that's sent, it should be able to send emails to anybody you choose. And then finally, there's an export directory here, and you would just say the directory, state the directory of the local box of where you want the file. And so for my examples, I can just show you, I use opt-va root. This is the VM. And when I use this, I just click the plus sign here, and so I'll show you here if I have it, what it might look like. So you see here, here's my directory, the PWD. It shows me as opt-va root, and if I do an ls, you see some prior reports that were put in this directory. And you can see the name of the report that was run, followed by the timestamp. You see various types of CSV. There's an HTML. And so this is just going to accumulate, and so it'll be up to the user to, archive these off. If you start getting hundreds or thousands of these, you might start impacting disk space, and so you would need to archive those off on your own, but you can do that. So also in the advanced, you have the ability to schedule. You can take all these parameters you just put in and schedule the report, or you can just execute it directly one time. And then if you want to pick a particular report that's already there, you can just click schedule, and it's just going to bring up the schedule dialog, allowing you to set the parameters of your schedule with some input, more the advanced input options if you want to change that on a particular report. We have aging policies for reports. As I mentioned, they will be saved to the database most of the time, and so we're going to want to archive those off at some point. Otherwise, you're going to accumulate a lot of reports that you may not need. And so there's a default policy here, but you can add, modify your specific policy here. And so the default one here, we'll just take a look at that. Right now, it's enabled, and the schedule interval is just the default. You can change your schedule if you want to monthly, weekly, or every 12 hours. Some of the options you get with dapping are the number of reports you want to create, the instances. If you want to create them if you want to do it by days, weeks, months, or years, you can do that. The default is the number of instances of that report. After 5 on this one, it would archive those off. The default DAP applies to all reports, but you can uncheck this and select specific reports and specific DAPs that you want applied to that those specific reports. And so you do have that granularity. If you choose to do that, you can archive some at different intervals and keep others for longer periods of time if necessary. Okay. And then you do have the ability, obviously, to delete the report itself. You can delete the history. We saw in the details panel, we accumulate that history. You can delete the history if you like, and you can also import and export reports that have been created in OpenManage. And then you also have the ability to share a report if you so choose to. And the way sharing works is it's part of our collaboration dialog. Let's see if I have an example here. So here's another user where I shared a report, and what they end up seeing, if they're logged in, you can share a report, and you'll see things like, oh, here's an asset report that was shared, the Brocade Fabric report. So other users in the system, you can send them reports and say, hey, look at this, type a little message in there or whatever. But you can share things that way as well. Okay. All right, that pretty much sums up the execution there. Let's look at one. Let's look at one particular one here. Let's see if I can find one that's interesting. Like the interfaces report. Let's just show what that might look like. I'm going to edit that and show you. So generally, this is again built on the interface template. It tells you right here. And this particular report is constrained in a couple of ways. We're saying all devices, meaning basically it's going to report on anything in inventory. But you also have the option in here in the filter to add a filter if you wanted to, as I mentioned earlier. But let's just go and execute this report and just see an example of what that might look like. And again, we're going to see this on the in my alert. You see it's now ready for viewing. As you go review it. And so what you're seeing here is a basic table report. It's in tabular format, basically columns and rows. And it's just reporting out what we have put in for the title and the subtitle here. And we'll normally have the filter up here telling you exactly what is being filtered on for this report. So again, you can create multiple reports if you want to constrain this to just Cisco or just Force 10 or things of that nature. Okay, so the main, I guess, part of this is the reporting or the report template. Since you need to create a report template for all devices, let's look at the one we just ran the report on. Let's go to interface. Let's edit that one. So here's our template. Again, here's our title and our subtitle, and there's various options in any template, a table template. The orientation, you can set landscape or portrait. That's just how it's laid out. The report summary, if you check this, it's just going to report the number of records in that particular report. It's a record count. If you want a row separator, this is a visual thing. The page header position, you can move that around. You can split columns automatically. If you don't want to set them manually, it'll just automatically decide what the dimensions are on the columns. If you have a lot of attributes in your first column in the first attribute that's in your report, you can group on that. If there's a bunch of repetitive ones, it'll group them all up and report them that way. And you can also summarize the data if that's what you're looking for. It's just basically the way it's displayed. Next thing is, on all templates, you're going to have a source option. This particular template was based on not necessarily all equipment in inventory. This one was specifically set to report only on interfaces. So you do have that option. Let me actually create a new one here and show you how that's selected.
And so for a template that was already created and you're editing it, then you don't change the entity type.
Yes, that's correct.
So you're creating a new one here, and on that you would go to that source. And this is where you are selecting the entity type because it hasn't created it yet.
And so here, and for example, the way we got interface in there was we went to interface, we went to the inventory resource. And this is probably the challenging part about reports, is finding the attributes you want. And so, for example, on inventory, you'd want to find inventory. For example, if you want interface report, you would need to go to the eyes. So let's go here.
You don't categorize some of the categories that have so big, they have more than one entry in that panel on the right side.
Yeah, and so that's how you find your attributes. And so here's the interface one that we were just looking at, and it pre-populates with the potential selections here and the available columns. And so you just pick your columns here for your report, and that becomes your template.
Yeah, just a little clarification on this. So he is selecting an entity type on the top where it's select your inventory source. He's selecting that. But in some cases, this gives you the ability so that on the lower side, where it says select your inventory columns, this is where you can have a report across more than one entity type, so you have relations between them.
So you see here,
why, you have an interface there. Well, he already selected interface, but you can also say, well, I know that interfaces are always related to cards and stuff, and you always have alarm data for a lot of these, and so you could just mix those together. It's very convenient.
Yeah, so example here, if you wanted to put in CLI name, which is a command line name that we put on a device, like TE010, and you want date created, you can also add, for example, if you want the equipment name on there. And so you're mixing and matching those different types of inventory types. So you can, as long as they show up here, you'll have the ability to mix and match those. So it gives you some flexibility. Okay, so once you've created your select the columns that you want in your report, then you can go to layout, and that's where you have the ability to further customize how your report's going to look. And so if you click on, what you see here is they're all listed here with the current default settings. And so you can set the order here with the up and down arrows, but you can also go in and change the column title if you want to. You can center it, set the column width that you want. If you want to sort on this first and something else second, you can set this order here. If you want to group on this attribute, you would select that.
So not for non-numeric data, you would group on that, and then for another one, if you happen to have a numeric data, then you would have like I guess we don't have it showing here, the calculation type.
Yeah, I'll show an example of that here in a minute, the calculation type. But yeah, that was a good point, Brandon. And then you can set the font size if you want on this column, and it can be different than the other columns. And then you can even set the colors here if you want on your font and background color. And then you can actually set the sort order for the report, descending, ascending. And so maybe I can add. I'm not gonna. Let me show you one that I have with that calculation type in it. Maybe we can go over that. So I created some demo reports here. Let me just look at one here on the table. We'll edit one of these, see if we have a piece of data we can look at the calculation type. So here you see again, if I went too fast here, I went back into the layout and I went to a particular numeric column here. I'm clicking on the edit, and you can see here there's this calculation type that gets exposed. And so what you're going to have is a tabular form and a column with a bunch of data in it. And you have the option here. You can sum it up. You can average it. You can just show me the high, show me the low, show me the sum, or show the min, average, and max. Now, if you pick one of these average, high, low, sum, it shows up at the bottom of the page for the most part. And if you choose the min, average, and max, it'll be summarized at the top of the report. And we'll see that here in a minute. But those are just some options that you can do. It's pretty flexible here in terms of how.
Now, if you do have a calculation type, you can. I think what you just said might not have been fully accurate, because if you don't have a group by, that means, and you do have a calculation type, that means what's going to show up in the summary is going to be for the entire report, and I believe that one does show up at the top. But then if you're grouping by something, like equipment, you might have more than one row in your report for the same equipment. You can say you want to group by that, and it'll have subgroups, and it'll also give you those calculations for each subgroup in addition to the report as a whole.
Okay, that makes sense. And so, again, just to summarize here, if you click this box here, these values will sum up the entire row at the bottom. If you do it unchecked, it will summarize for the whole report.
Well, no, you're gonna get it for the whole report anyways.
Okay.
But you can, if you want to group by something, then it will also show it for that group. Now, you probably don't ever want to have one that's you're grouping by that attribute and you're also having a calculation type. Well, that doesn't make sense. You're grouping by something else, and then within that group, you have a calculation.
Okay, let's see if we have an example of this here. So I have this performance report here that has some of those attributes on it. This is the demo performance report, and I've also created some reports based on that template. And so let's go there and see. I think it's this one here. Let's execute this one. See what that might look like. So I possibly just changed that to something that is not valid, because now it is not reporting that right. I think it was on this one. Is it on this one? I didn't need to check that. Let's try that one again, or let's try this. Actually, this one here might have that detail that I was looking for. So you'll normally see this report started, and then when it's done, it'll say it's done, and you'll see the report here. So this is a TFA report, and so here you see an example of one that is being summed up here, or I'm sorry, an average. And so you see all the values are 256, so it's averaging it out.
And
so
this
this column,
the whole report.
Yeah, so this is for the whole report.
So there isn't a group here.
So it's not grouped, and so if I were to go back to that and try to group it, let's just see if we can change that. And so, Brandon, you're telling me on bits per second here.
You don't want to group by. You want to make group by like IP address or equipment manager name.
So if I group by IP address, I just say group, right?
Yeah.
Apply that.
And then you have
Save that.
Calculation type for one of the other attributes, and it should
I think so.
give you that.
So this template should pick that up. Let's execute that and see what we get.
So as you can see there,
So there you see.
it is has those groups for the IP address. Every time the IP address changes, then it has a different. Well, I guess you only have one IP address.
Yeah, I've only got one exporter here.
Yeah,
but if you had multiple exporters here, or depending on what your data is, if you had multiple of those categories, you would see this separate section right here for each category.
For each one, and then you would still have that 2 lines below to show the full summary for the report as a whole. Yeah.
So just know that you have that ability in the template to summarize your data based on those calculations. It has to be numeric data. Okay, so there's 3 kinds of templates that can be created. We have the table template, and when you right-click and say New, you're going to have a table, a trend, and a comparison. So we've seen the table report. Again, that's just columns and rows. That's kind of the example that I provided. The next one is trend. And so on the trend report, basically this is used for traffic flow data. So if I were to create a new one here.
It's for performance monitor or traffic flow data.
Traffic flow.
Okay, and that's any kind of data where it changes over time. We, rather than having actual entities, we're reporting on how certain values change over time.
Yeah, that's the key point, is the period over time. And so you do have your option of line, column, or line or column. And so again, it's the same thing here where you're going to go in.
Line is probably more useful.
Yeah, so you're only given the options of active monitoring options or traffic flow, but the layout options are also going to be the same once you get those attributes selected. You do have the option to include the chart details. If you want to see the raw data that's being graphed, you can also include that on the report. And then you also have the abilities, some of these reports may have a lot of entities being monitored, and obviously we can't put hundreds of entities on one graph. It doesn't look very good. And so we break it out and give you an option here to put as many as you like. There may be a limit on this,
maximum, but one per graph or two per graph.
Well, this will do 10 per graph right now. I don't know if it'll be a little higher, but you probably don't want that many. In fact, in some cases, you may only want one or two per graph. And so let me show you an example of a trend report that I created. A template here.
One thing you said is you actually said something about the layout being the same. Actually, for trend
layout
report,
options are the same.
They're not actually.
Okay, let's look at one then.
You don't really have layout options because that's determined by other things. Yeah.
Okay, so the layout options are here, and so they're generally the same options.
Yeah. Well, some of those are not relevant actually. That brings up an interesting point.
Okay, so what's not relevant?
Well, the fact that what it's doing is you're saying, okay, I want to generate like a graph. So most of these things are actually kind of only relevant to it.
So maybe things like font size.
Yeah.
If the attribute is going to show up in the graph, it may not show up on this type of report. So just be aware of that.
Might be something that we'll have to get into a little bit, is to actually hide some of these fields that are really not relevant for it.
And for example, sort priority doesn't really apply to a graph, and so that's some things. There are some improvements around reporting that we still need to work on here. But anyway, that's in terms of other layout options. You do have some options here. Again, they may or may not apply based on the type of report you are generating. Okay, so trend report. Let's just see what one looks like. Let's look at our TFA trend report. I'm going to execute it. Just look and see. I think I already executed. We'll do it again. That was my tabular report. I believe that was the one I executed, and I thought that was the one that had some data in it. Try it again. Maybe I grabbed the wrong one off the list here. All right, let's create a new one then off of our trend report here.
You can maybe edit that one.
It's a table. I'm sorry, it's a table. So it's the PM one we want to look at. So again, I'm looking right here at my types here. I have one trend report based on performance monitor, and I think this one we might have made an edit to it that caused us to let me execute that one here. This is the demo trend template PM. So I updated these names, and sometimes these don't update right away.
Did you put the word trend in the actual report record? Because if so, you could probably just search for trend.
I thought it was this one here. This is it, demo trend report.
Yeah.
I think this is it. So let's execute that one.
Unless you misnamed it for some reason.
So there's my report. Okay, so this is my trend report, and so what we see here, and I'll go back to the template on this to show you what's going on here. But the attributes here selected, in this particular case, I have packets out per second, and then since I have two attributes on here, it's going to show me a separate graph of packets in per second. And I'm selecting this based on two reportable attributes or reportable devices, in this case, which are interfaces, TE01 and TE1029. And so what you're seeing here is that graph based over time. And you can see here in the filter summary what I'm doing. A period is detail, and pull date time is within the last hour. I could change this on the filter report if I wanted to. But let's go look at this one and see what's going on here. So demo this one here. So again, I have the common layout and then the source here. So I've gone through and I've created inventory type, and I'm picking a specific monitor. So this is a monitor that I created that's monitoring. It's actually monitoring a bunch of interfaces, but I've filtered this report to only show me 2 of those interfaces from that monitor. And I've selected 2 attributes here. The packets in per second, the packets out per second.
That might be one thing that you haven't shown yet, is if you go into the report record that uses this template, and go into the filter tab to show how, because that's, after you've created your template, you can create multiple reports based on that template. And just about the only change there would be the filter. Like I want to use this same template, the same data source essentially, just want to filter it different. Maybe I want to save the last 24 hours or maybe the last 1 hour, So it's on this second tab there, that filter tab.
So, okay, so it does look like this one actually is just filtering on the time. So my monitor is probably filtering itself to just report these 2. But you could edit this filter, and you could add a variety of other information here to further constrain this report by target, by just target description, monitor net target name, as well as other things that are available here for you to choose from. Okay. So just be aware of that. There's two areas there for most reports to filter again. So in some cases down below, you'll see depending on the report, I'll show that again on a new report. If you pick some template, I'm just going to grab something here, select. You have this area down below where you can also say this report only applies to specific groups. And then again, you have the filter section that allows you to add a filter that we just showed. So you can constrain your report in 2 different ways there. Okay, the last one here I want to show is a comparison report. And comparison reports are used to display selected attributes comparing numeric values from reporting devices. And generally this is intended for performance monitor and TFA data. The key thing here is you're comparing numeric values. And so this is another part where potentially our reporting framework may allow you to select things that may not be valid. So you got to think about what you're reporting here. For example, you wouldn't want to compare, 2 device names. It's not, or 2 port names. That's the kind of attribute that's not something you want on a graph. So what you're doing is you're reporting values from attributes that have graphable components. And so in this particular case,
I think you also have before we could select between bar or line. In this case, for comparison, if you go back to that general tab, I think we have if the difference between bar and pi, right?
Yes, and column.
Oh, okay, column too, yeah, which is about the same as a bar. It's just horizontal versus vertical. Yeah.
Okay.
So pi might be useful. You can see, comparison that way.
Yes. And so again, on this, I'm using the same attributes here, similar attributes here to compare to compare values. And so let's see what that comparison report might look like. That wasn't the one I used earlier. Let's just try that one. Okay, so here's a comparison report. Now what we're doing is we're comparing 2 attributes, and I grouped them by the attribute. And so we see here we've got the pink one here is TE101 interface. Packets in or packets out is showing here. And then we've got, there's low value on the TE1029, so it's not showing it. But
yeah, it's a little difficult, but no, it's showing it.
It's just very low. It's just very low amount. So anyway, you're comparing these 2. These are the 2 reporting types you're comparing, and these are the 2 attributes you're comparing, and it's showing them side by side. So that's an example of a comparison report. And again, you have the filter summary here, match all the following, and the period details pulled in the last 60 minutes. So you can obviously modify that on the report as well. Okay, so we have another example of a comparison report. This might have been one. Let's keep that one we showed earlier. Okay, so here's another one where we're comparing again. This time we're comparing TFA data. And this time I'm comparing TFA applications. This comes from the application portlet on TFA, and I'm comparing basically bytes over here. This is grouped into bytes. These are my two attributes. Bytes is one. I'm comparing bytes for trivial file transfer, ICMP, and worldwide web TFA data. And then over here, we're looking at packets. And so from a packet perspective, it's very low. From a bytes, it's a little bit higher. And so I can show you that.
And what is that? What's the time range on that? You always have a time range. I just want to know. A lot of times the filter says, there you go. No, what's this run?
It's just saying run.
Yeah.
And
so you might want to
date.
You might want to put that into the title then of the report, so you can know, because I mean, it's not relevant. You need that context of saying, you know, this is the top applications over the last probably the last 24 hours is probably what it is.
Yeah, so there's no filter on this, so it's basically trying to report.
Yeah, last 24. That's actually the default filter.
Yeah.
It's the last 24 hours.
So if I wanted to, I would create a filter here and just say in the last, gather data from TFA data from the last hour or minutes or whatever that could be. Okay, and we take a quick look at the comparison report template here. This is the demo comparison TFA. Let's see here. This one, demo comparison TFA applications. Where did I see that here? Search for this. Not that one. I changed the name on these before. It takes a minute for that to update, so I'm thinking it's not showing up here.
Do you have the report entry right there?
It does, and it does say the
demo.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong column. It's demo comparison 2. All right, I was looking at the title, so that's the template right there. Let's just look at that and see what that looks like quickly to give you another example of comparison. And so again, just basic information here. You can include the chart details, which I didn't do. I just click, we'll save it there, maybe regen it. But here's my source. Again, I'm using traffic flow as my source, and it gives me the attributes that are available here. And on traffic flow, I have these attributes available. I selected just these 2 bytes and packets for my report. And then again, you have some layout options here. And anyway, I'm not going to regenerate that, but that's generally what the comparison looks like. And so you might need to play around a little bit with the attributes. If you've got the wrong attributes in the report, you're going to see items like error reporting. You'll see issues like this where it says error creating the report. And generally that means that you've got either incompatible attributes on the report, things that can't be graphed, or things that are used in combination that can't be displayed properly, and so you'll see that error. So just one thing to be said on TFA is that in the user guide, I'm going to point you into a section here in the user guide. There's a whole section on the TFA reporting that helps you determine what those appropriate combinations are. And so generally each template for TFA should either be a time slice data, where the data values represent specific time slice, or slice within time, within the total time or a range of reports, or it's aggregate data, where the data values represent sums or averages across the entire time range. And so you can't mix and match those generally, and so just understanding what those are is important if you're getting errors with the reports, and this is a good place to look. If you look for traffic flow analyzer and you search for how to create a traffic report, you'll come up with that. It's on page 502 of the user guide in Service Pack 2 of 6.2. And then finally, just real quickly here to wrap up, a couple of things to note is that when you generate reports, there's a default limit of 5,000 rows, and that's generally for just resource. If you had an infinite number of rows, you could potentially consume a lot of memory. And so if you go to the Help tab here, I want to point you to one thing here on reports, that there is an option here right at the top, talks about here the 5,000 row limit, and there's a property file that can be set to modify your row limit. And so you can go up to 10,000 if you want. Just know that there's potentially an impact on performance if you do that. And if you're not seeing all the data, maybe that you're exceeded the 5,000 rows and we just can't show it all. So just be aware that constraint exists. And if you need to set to higher, you can set this property, and it tells you where to set it here in this reports.lib file called rpt.reports. And then the second thing is that reports also can come on an action. And I'll go to my Actions tab here, search for report. And so there's various reports here that you can run automatically as an action. And one of the ones that ties into our automation framework would be the execute report. And so what you can do is if you have an action that comes in, something happens on your network, and you have an event processing rule that handles that action, but you also want to generate a report when that happens, amongst many other things. For example, you may have a config file that's out of compliance or has something in it. You can go correct that with another action, but you can also tie in this execute report action to go run a report, maybe do a backup or not a backup, but do a report of the interfaces or the ports or something on the device that you want that are important to that particular action, and you could have that also emailed at the same time if you wanted to. So just be aware that there's a variety of ways you can use our action framework as well to execute reports through our automation framework too. Okay. I believe this that wraps it up. This is running a little bit long here, so we'll open it up for comments at this point.
Well, we didn't talk about group reports. That's where
they're not in there until the next release.
Oh, that's right. They're not
group reports will not be in until the our release near the end of the year or beginning of next year, and we'll have a separate talk on that when that feature becomes available. It will give you the ability to group reports and
like have a graph and the table in the same PDF file.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not there now.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up to questions. If you do have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat window, and we can answer those if you have any.
Someone wants to know, can I automatically get these dropped into a file on my network every day? Like I'm interested in the last day's worth of information. Can you do that? I think you can. I think that's to do that. You can actually schedule it. That's what he was showing earlier. Is the advanced execution.
Yeah, so you can, again, that was the advanced here where we can go, if you want to export it to a directory for somebody or even email it, again, you can just
type in your directory. You have a schedule right there. So you can do that all right here. You can say, I want this to execute every day at a certain like midnight, cover the data for that previous day and drop it into this folder every day.
Yes.
Or email it to you every day.
Yes, good point. Okay. Anything else? Okay, a question about just the reports and organizing them. So we may entertain doing this internally as well, but you can go into, if you want to organize your reports, and I've actually set up a couple of filters here already. For example, if you want something just to show Cisco reports, you can go in and create filters, and I'm just basically doing it by name here. Any name begins with Cisco, and I can save that as my default report if I wanted to. And the way you do that is you go over to your tab here on that wrench, and you can say save my default as Cisco reports. And so whenever you come back to the screen, it should, whenever you expand the screen now, it should go back, and by default it will just show you Cisco reports. And so you can customize this and do one for every driver, or if you have my reports, just call them my reports and then filter on it that way. There's a variety of filter options here that are just available on most portlets here. You can do it by subtitle, title, type, however you want to do that. The domain item here is a common across most portlets. This has to do with multi-tenancy, which will be covered in another tech talk. Okay, I think that wraps it up for now. We ran a little bit long. I want to thank everyone for joining you, and we will see you next time.